Hello, it's nice to see a very alert crowd still this afternoon. It's really been a great day so far. So I'm going to quickly tell you who's on our panel, and then I'm going to let them each introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our conversation. We'll have some time for questions towards the end. So I'm going to actually start down at the far end here. Put my glasses on. We've got Kevin McAndrew, Director of New Partnership Development at Save the Children. I'm going to walk through all of you, and then I'll let you. And then we have Christine Lopez, Vice President of Corporate Citizenship at McKesson. And then Brittany Hill, CEO and co-founder of Catalist. And Paul Musser, Senior, I love this title, by the way, Senior Vice President, Humanitarian and Development at Mastercard. And Kausik, Rajgopal, West Coast Regional Manager at McKinsey & Company. So Kevin, tell us about what you do.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Kevin McAndrew. I work with Save the Children. Some of you might be familiar with our organization. We focus on the health, education, and survival of children around the world in 120 countries. This actually is our 100th year. We were founded by, Dory works with me there. We were founded by a very enterprising woman in London and Eglantine Jebb in 1919 in the aftermath of the World War. We're founded on the premise that all children have rights, and that permeates all the work we do today. My role, I get the pleasure of spending time at the intersection between causes like Save the Children and then the business operations of companies like yours. So I focus on building partnerships where we can really infuse, I think, what's the tagline, cause into a brand. And we do that in a multitude of ways that we can dig into later.
Very great. And Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Lopez. So I wear two hats. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Citizenship at McKesson, which is a very large healthcare company. And I also serve as the President of the McKesson Foundation. And so I oversee corporate social responsibility, and I also manage the philanthropic grant making and programs of the foundation.
Great. And Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany Hill, the CEO and co-founder of Catalist. We are essentially a SaaS-based platform where you start or accelerate your social impact partnerships. So kind of like Kevin, we work at that intersection and sort of serve as a matchmaking and measurement platform for both companies and causes, helping companies in particular identify the issues to stand for, which partners on the nonprofit side to align with, and measure the efficacy of those partnerships.
All right. And Paul.
My name is Paul Musser. I work for Mastercard, the payment firm, and I manage a portion of our internal social enterprise, which is focused on providing technology and services to the humanitarian and development community worldwide.
And I'm Kausik Rajgopal. I'm the managing partner for our Western region at McKinsey. McKinsey is a global management consulting firm. We work with companies, NGOs, and governments on various themes. And in the last 5 years, we've picked a couple of global themes where we think we can make a positive contribution, and those are gender diversity in the workplace and youth unemployment.
Great, thank you. So we're really going to talk about how businesses actually find that cause that that really fits their mission and culture, and how they're and we're going to talk about how some of the most effective and successful cause marketing programs, and how do you know they're effective. And you know, they really must be transparent, they must be sustainable, they must be purposeful, they make a compelling story, and they must be, I think, authentic is a very key word here. So I'd really just like to open with each of you answering this question, which is how a company does choose a cause that is a natural fit with its main business. Tell, you know, through the lens of your companies and organizations, and that really serves its core values. And as you do that, will you give an example from your own situation? And we'll start down the line again with Kevin.
With me, okay.
Rolling down the line.
So I think my perspective on this will be a little different than the others on the panel. So I see this across multiple businesses. So in my role, we work with a very large portfolio of very diverse types of companies in all kinds of different industries. We probably touch something like a third of the Fortune 100 list, and then many other companies that wouldn't be on the list. And we work with them in a variety of ways, but the approach is always very similar, whether it's a consumer-oriented campaign, whether we're talking about impact in the communities where you operate, or even if it's collaborating on building a new product or service that can move our mission forward as well as the business's objective. It's all about, like you said, finding the match. And I don't think there's any one way to do it, but I think there's a method that works, which is to really approach it with a lot of transparency and be very clear around what the objective is. So if we're talking about traditional cause marketing, is the objective a consumer one? Is it something else? To really be clear up front, and that'll help you find not only what's the right partnership, but what's the right messaging, what's the right program that you would build this around, right? And I think if we go back earlier in the day, there was some talk around it has to be linked to the core of the business, but also something that's passionate to the employees and not something that's a complete pet project. So it has to be sort of right in that sweet spot where it makes sense with what the product is for, right? So if it's soap, maybe you want to focus on hand washing because it kills a lot of kids. But it also has to be something that people can get behind, they can understand it, both on the consumer side as well as on the employee side. So it has that longevity and it has that stickiness to it.
And who are some of the for-profit partners that Save the Children have worked with?
Well, there's many, and you can read all about them if you go to our website. Maybe one that we work with in each of the ways that I've described would be Johnson & Johnson. So we take a very specific approach around focusing on maternal newborn health with Johnson & Johnson, right? It just makes sense. It's what you would think they would be doing if they were going to spend any time in the social impact space. And so when it gets to that point where it just feels like, yeah, that makes sense, that's the thing you should do. So really what's core to the brand in the way that moms and babies is core to the brand of J&J, you need to find that same level of authenticity and natural fit for any of these kind of campaigns to really work to feel true.
And Christine, it's different for McKesson because it's B2B. I mean, with a consumer, sometimes it's more natural to maybe find some of these programs. But tell us about, you have some really interesting.
Sure. So just for context, so McKesson is a healthcare company, and you raised a very good question of like how, as a company, do you pick a cause that really relates to the brand and feels authentic? So as you can imagine, within healthcare, that's very broad. And so how do we narrow it down? And so we start our journey by starting really with our mission, which is ultimately to help improve patient care. And then we started asking ourselves a series of guiding questions, including where is our business growing that also aligns and meets with a growing social need? Well, the CDC predicts that the need for cancer care is going to surpass the need for cardiac care within the next several years. McKesson supports 9,000 oncologists. We're investing in businesses that help oncologists provide better patient care. One of the examples is we're having infusion centers done at the doctor's office because it costs half as much as it does in a hospital setting, and it's also more comfortable and convenient for patients. And so we knew that cancer care felt authentic, felt right. It also not just touches many of our business units, our patients and our customers, but also members of our own McKesson family. So it was a cause that we really could get behind. And then finally, we ask ourselves, okay, well, within cancer care, what are the programs that we need to invest in so that you can make a measurable and meaningful impact? And so we couldn't find the answer to that unless we started really asking questions. And so we went on a listening tour. So we asked oncologists, nurses, social workers, patient navigators, employees. And what we found was really three, very important opportunities. So is it okay if I share some of what we found? So one is, we all agreed that patients really need financial and emotional support. And so in addition to our company's patient assistance programs and our funding for, social networks, what we did was we also encouraged all of our employee volunteers and their children to create care packages for patients during our Hallmark Signature Volunteer event, which I think many of the companies here have. And these care packages contain a note of encouragement so that patients really feel like they're not alone in their journey. Second, we learned that transportation, getting to the treatment center, was actually a big barrier for care for low-income patients. And so what we did was we aligned our grant-making strategy so that when we donate these care packages, there's also a grant to support the patients in getting to their treatment centers. And then finally, we learned that if you were a patient of color and you were fighting blood cancer, the odds were really against you in finding a life-saving match. And so what we did was we mobilized our employee resource groups and leveraged the diversity of McKesson to really grow the International Marrow Registry. And so we started the McKesson Marrow Drive 3 years ago. And since then, we've added 5,000 new donors to the registry, helped provide matches for 26 patients, and facilitated 3 life-saving transplants to date.
That's great.
You can't get much more measurable than that. Now, Brittany, I'm actually going to jump over you for a moment because, well, and because we're going to get into your. Don't feel left behind. You're gonna wrap it all up here.
I'll feel it.
But I want to get through sort of the examples of partnerships, and then you're going to explain how you work with the to form these partnerships and measure them. So, Paul, let's hear your.
So in Mastercard's case, we have started, and this goes back almost 15 years ago, we know how we make money. We make money from a transaction, whether that's on an Apple Pay or on a card or some other methodology, mobile money. Those all are transactions, we make our money that way. And so what we did is we walked back from that model, and I think this speaks to the fact of knowing exactly what's at the heart of your business, and then trying to derive what are the motivations that extend from there. So in our case, the company has made a significant set of investments around inclusive growth, because quite frankly, communities that are not growing inclusively don't drive transactions. So if all the wealth happens to sit in 1% of the population, we don't make as much money. And that sounds mercenary, but it is clear. And so our intent is very simple. How do we grow communities? Because that helps our business grow. And that is through investing in inclusive growth. And as a result of that, inclusive growth leads to financial inclusion as an area that we particularly have an expertise in. And so that has been the hallmark of the work that Mastercard has done over the last 10 to 15 years, is our employees, our corporation, our investments are very focused on inclusive growth because we believe it's good for the communities in which we live and operate, and it's good for us, so it creates a sustainable model where we have an investment that pays for all our stakeholders, and then financial inclusion is an instrument within that. I happen to work within the social enterprise, so a few years ago we created within the corporation a wholly owned separate social enterprise that's focused on providing services to UN agencies and to nonprofits, both humanitarian and development organizations. And a quick example of that is the work actually that we're doing with Kevin and Save the Children. Save has a deep-seated desire to try and eliminate the death rate of children under the age of 5. It's the hallmark of what they're pushing forward. And while at a top level, you wouldn't imagine that a payments company has anything to do with pneumonia. But the reality is a large portion of the work that needs to be done is helping doctors, healthcare professionals, clinic operators, social workers track which child has been vaccinated, which one is getting the care that they need. And then sometimes this is in places where telecommunications doesn't exist, power doesn't exist. That happens to be an area that we do really well. And so we have partnered together to start to develop tools that are specifically designed to leverage the ingredients that I have on the shelf, mixed in a solution that helps Save the Children address death rates of children between 1 and 5. So that's an example of how you take those tools, focus them on what you do well, and you find a partner who has a complementary need.
And I think you were talking about a way that, people sometimes, there are no banks in certain areas, and let's say there was a natural disaster, and you have a way that actual money can be delivered, if I can.
Yeah, so another example is a group of NGOs came to us a few years back and said, and maybe you are all familiar with this, but many are not, because of the pictures above the fold of newspapers or on TV are oftentimes of a truck showing up with a bag of rice. But the humanitarian community has learned a long time ago that that is necessary for a short period of time, but really what you want is a market recovery. You want those families to get back to work. You want those shops to reopen. And so, for example, Save the Children and others are leaders in this concept of let's give cash instead of a bag of rice and kind goods. And this, although it sounds simple, is a major strategy change and a significant amount of effort. Now, that's fine if you want to put somebody with a backpack with a bunch of envelopes with cash stuffed in them and send them up the hill. And frankly, they do just that. But that is not the best way to do it. And so what we've done is we've developed a couple of tools that allow organizations like Save the Children to allocate goods, allocate services when a bank or a mobile money entity isn't operational in the marketplace. Our hope is that's short-lived. We want those mobile money players. We want the PayPals. We want entities to come back into market. But while that's not the case, we want to stand in and help them make that a success.
Kausik.
Our criteria really derive from our mission. We were founded as a partnership in 1926. Our mission is to make a lasting and sustainable positive impact and to excite and retain exceptional people. There is a picture of our partnership from 1941. It consists of 7 American white men. And that is not our partnership today. Today we have 2,500 partners. We have 25,000 consultants globally. We're in about 65 countries around the world. So a few years ago, we reflected on how we were contributing to making a positive difference beyond serving our clients. And it's fair to say that from day one, the spirit of community engagement has been a part of our partnership. So we do, on an ongoing basis, pro bono work in local communities that we're a part of. And quite often, we'll partner with our clients. We partnered with Mastercard, for example, and foundations on financial inclusion in Africa. But we stepped back and said, how can we make a more systematic, positive contribution? What are big problems in the world where we could uniquely make a positive difference? So the first part of our mission and making an impact, and which would excite our people. And the two that floated to the top were around youth unemployment and gender diversity. So just on youth unemployment, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, there are several countries around the world where youth unemployment was very high. So as an example, in Spain in 2012, youth unemployment was nearly 50%. And what was interesting to us was that at the same time, there were employers in Spain that were looking for and not finding people. So we found that there was a skills mismatch and that we were potentially uniquely positioned to train and place young people in jobs in multiple countries. So we started out in Europe and Africa. We seed funded a distinct and separate nonprofit called Generation. Generation's funds were then matched by foundations, NGOs, and companies. And since its inception 5 years ago, it has placed 26,000 graduates in jobs. And one of the things we track after training and placing them is what percentage of them remain in those jobs a year later. And over 70% of them remain in their jobs a year later. So starting in Europe and Africa, we've now brought Generation to the US. We're now in 12 cities around the country. And we hope to continue to scale it up in America as well, because we think even in this country, there is that skills mismatch and employer interest to help ameliorate youth unemployment. Our other cause, which we really picked as a firm globally 5 years ago, was around gender diversity. We did some research in partnership with clients that suggested that at the current rate at which women were being promoted and ascending to the C-suite and to boards, it would be more than 8 decades before we attained gender parity in the workplace. And that felt like a long time. And we also took a look internally, right? And the reality is that we were an overwhelmingly male partnership, and we said we can do better internally, and we can help our clients do better. So we entered into a partnership with Lean In and Wall Street Journal. It's now 5 years old. It's called Women in the Workplace. It is now the definitive benchmark for gender diversity in corporate America. This year, 300 companies accounting for 13 million employees will participate in the benchmark. And we get a full view of the pipeline, if you will, from recruiting through to the C-suite and to boards for women in the workplace. And we hope this makes a positive contribution because in a fact-based way, we get to some real insights. I'll share one really quickly from the last report. It is a little bit of a meme in corporate America that women tend to fall out, if you will, of the promotion pipeline to a large extent because they opt out, because they have less of a desire to be promoted, or they may have kids. And our research shows that this is in fact not true, that women want to be promoted at the same rate as men. What we find is that overwhelmingly they miss out on the first promotion, and that actually cascades all the way up. So for every 100 men that are promoted for the first promotion in the US, only 80 women are promoted. Only 60 women of color are promoted, so it's a particular challenge for women of color. And we believe that there are things that companies can work on, particularly around addressing unconscious bias, that can make a big difference. We've taken a look at ourselves, as I said, and committed to goals that we've set, which I'm happy to talk about further. But just as an example, in our Western region, 6 years ago, in our incoming recruiting class, only 22% of that class were women. This year, we'll be at 51%. So we've made some big strides internally. The journey isn't complete, and there's a long way to go, obviously, in corporate America, with only 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs being women. But we believe we can continue to make a positive contribution there.
Very interesting. And we're really hearing you all talk about measurement and outcomes and that alignment to the core values of the company. So, Brittany, this is what you do. You help companies figure out the right way to do it and how to measure it. So tell us, how you help companies choose that natural fit cause and that fits with the main business, that fits with its core values, and then how you measure it.
Yeah, well, this is the question for the last 2 years, right? Brands taking stands, and how do we figure out what the right stance is? And I think in hearing a lot of the panelists today and a lot of the conversations, our approach to finding that authenticity and that transparency, or whatever you want to call it, is starting with your people. It's the same answer that you guys have been talking about, whether it is diversity and inclusion and making sure that that's a common thread throughout every facet and every department within a business. For us, approaching cause identification is the same. Start with your people. Figure out what your employees care about. Figure out what resonates with them. What organizations are they already engaged with? Figure out what your consumers care about. We provide, at Catalist, we do a psychosocial analysis on brands' people, their consumers, their employees, to figure out what do they already do? What are they already caring about? And of course, we have to pair that, right, with everything you guys have shared today of brand value. Here's what we are as a brand. Here's what's intrinsic with our product or our services, and create that lovely Venn diagram of where it meets in the middle. But it is really starting with the people and the power that keeps that company going. And for us, that's people. And so starting from that perspective, and then of course there's a whole matrix that everyone has shared here in terms of finding the greatest need and how does that align with your brand values, and what does that look like from a commitment level, and what's the fiscal screening of the various nonprofit partners that we partner with. I mean, all of those come into play, but if you're going to take that first step, starting with people.
And so how do companies know that their expectations have been met? How do you help them, set their goals, and how do you help them, follow the metrics that show that this is working for the brand, it's working for the company, as well as for the cause? I mean, it's got to do both, right? I mean,
it should. I think that's why we all are here. I don't know if you guys would agree on the panel, but I believe truly that social impact, social good, infusing a cause into your brand is a marathon, not a sprint. And that expectation internally has to be set with leadership, middle management, your nonprofit partners. If you're a brand, we coach nonprofits all the time. I don't know if you would agree, Kevin, on that as well, that this is a long-term commitment, and that measurement has to be implemented from pre-partnership throughout that commitment and then post, because it should have an impact, again, on your people. Do your employees care about this partnership or this commitment? Do they feel better about it? Are they engaged with it? What about your consumers? Do they have a positive or negative sentiment around what you're doing? And then is it driving brand reputation? Is it driving, yes, sales, yes, satisfaction? All of those attributes should be measured, and it's tough to measure sometimes.
Yeah.
Impact on the mission, first and foremost. I don't know, Kevin, if you have thoughts on how you guys, it sounds like you guys are measuring a lot of that, which is fantastic. A lot of
Yeah.
nonprofits
Yeah,
have a
and-
tough time doing that.
And I would say it's been a very interesting, so I've been in this field doing public-private, as it's called, partnerships for like 15 years. It's totally different than it was now when I started. So it used to be enough that you'd sort of like create a problem for your own company. You'd set CSR goals, right? Like we're gonna do X by Y date. And then you'd give out grants to sort of fix the stuff. But you knew it was gonna work because you did the math and you knew you could basically buy the result over 5 years, you'd be done, good, celebrate, right? That's done. That world is like very quickly going away. And the kind of collaboration in the measurement is much more now baked into the core of a business and its operations and how it does business, right? So the philanthropy and the grants still has a role to play, but increasingly what we see is that the way to approach this is very multifaceted. To think about your brand and your consumers, to think about the communities where you operate, think about the products you're creating and how you could either extend them or create them in a new way. And then who are the partners that you need to have to enable all those things, because it's probably fair to say you're not gonna be able to do it and like go alone on all of those pieces. And so in terms of the measurement, it really starts to become about, is this helping support business growth? And like this is, crazy for the NGO guy to say. But that's really what we go for when we approach these conversations, because it's very consultative, and if it doesn't have a link to the business, it's not sustainable for you and us. And ultimately what we want is something sustainable. And so, think really hard about what is it in terms of how my business literally works on the ground that can lend itself to these kinds of collaborations, and what are the causes that matter most to your operations, and pick those. They'll be the hardest to do, but they'll be the ones that are worth doing, and you'll get the best return, I guess you could call it. Like look at some of the stuff Timberland did in Haiti. I forget the name of the program, but it was absolutely magnificent. They rebuilt entire supply chains. They recreated the entire cotton farming industry. They built sort of cash for work programs in order to build the sustainable economy. In the process, they created a social enterprise that they've spun out and is now operating in other countries, right? So that's cause, but it's also just Timberland doing its business in a good way. So I would implore the group, that's the approach I would take.
I'm gonna get to audience Q&A in a second. I wanted, Christine, you mentioned that you can measure the impact on retention. You're very focused on that employee engagement side of it.
Yes, thank you. So because we are primarily a B2B company, one of the imperatives that we have is how can we leverage the causes in not only building our brand, but in really retaining our employees. And so, like you, we realize that employees really want to make a difference. They want to work for a company that gives them a sense of purpose and where they feel like they can really make a difference. But as a healthcare company, we also found that actually relatively few of our employees touch the patients or have direct interactions with the patients. And so by allowing our employees and inviting them, and not only them, but also their children, to support the cancer care causes that we have, it really, we saw a really strong correlation between tenure, particularly at our distribution centers, because the material handlers, we have a motto that says, it's not just a package, it's a patient. And then during community days, we invite them and their families into the DCs to help create care packages for patients. And what we found was that our issue of having high turnover, especially at the 2-year mark, there was actually a really strong correlation between retention after 2 years and participation in those programs.
Right. And Brittany, I had asked you on the way up the steps, if you had just some piece of data, a story that really told the story.
Yeah,
And
so just going back to data on your people and kind of understanding their motivations and passions a little bit more to help you navigate which cause to go to. We work with a lot of brands in various scale, from HBO to Wilson to Popeyes, and in this particular case, ModCloth in the room. In this particular case, we were working with Harry's, the shaving company, if any of you are fans or have subscriptions. And they knew that they wanted to redefine masculinity, much like Gillette. They were the first on the scene. But they didn't know what that meant. And so they went to their consumers and really wanted to understand, what does that mean? And so we did a whole analysis of their consumers to see what causes matter to them, what are the subcategories within things like redefining masculinity, what nonprofit organizations are those consumers, Harry, if you want to call a persona name, what was he already interested in? And it turns out that was sort of shocking to them that they were really passionate about LGBTQ equality. And this wasn't something that the brand was expecting. It wasn't something they knew really about their core consumer, but found out through this analysis. So I don't know if you guys remember, but saw it in the marketplace. But because of that data, Harry's made a concerted effort to, under their umbrella of redefining masculinity, focus on and actually changed all of their razor handles to a rainbow color for the Pride Month of June. Last year, from a consumer-facing perspective, did a lot of support around LGBTQ equality and rights, worked with influencers, but then most importantly, took that internally and set up diversity and inclusion programs for employees at Harry's to mimic what they were doing and sort of put their money where their mouth was in terms of their employees as well when it came to LGBTQ rights. So that was just one piece of data can really drive really specific and important decisions that can resonate, and they saw sales skyrocket and they saw employee satisfaction skyrocket. So one example.
Very great.
How to use that.
All right. I want to let the audience ask some questions. So if you want to raise your hand and identify yourself, we've got some microphone runners. Here's right here.
Hi, how's it going? Jerome Attendito with Pandora. My question is, Brittany earlier mentioned brands taking a stand. Has anyone on the panel experienced maybe taking a stand and taking a misstep where you either had to double down on your original stand or take a step back? Would love to hear any experiences there.
They're pretty calculated up here.
Well, I can describe it. It was when we started our gender diversity research, we tested doing it with a few clients, right? And the very quick feedback we got from clients was, you better look in the mirror before you start out going and doing research on gender diversity. So that actually led us to a pretty soul-searching internal conversation about what were the sources of the challenge we were having. We did a fair amount of work on unconscious bias. And I remember talking to my wife about it, and she said, well, now that you're sure you're biased, are you actually going to solve the problem? And that led us to doing something that is quite unusual for us, right? We actually set goals that we shared publicly. So we said by 2020, we will be at parity in the recruiting percentage of women we bring in. We'd be at 25% of partners being women. So we made some pretty explicit public commitments. And that was a result of us testing with clients a version of our partners, right? And saying, how would this resonate?
I don't know if PayPal's in the room, but I know one example, if you're familiar, is PayPal's commitment to not actually producing or going into a state a couple years ago that decided not to pass the transgender restroom bill. And they decided they were about to create a production facility there and expand. I don't want to talk for PayPal. If they're in the room, raise your hand. And so they decided not to do it. It cost them tens of millions of dollars not to, but they knew that was the right thing to do. Got a lot of backlash, lost a lot of money, but they still took a stand. And in the end, I think they're doing okay. Yeah.
They are. Well, and even more recently, they did, right during the furloughs, during the government shutdown.
Yeah, again, yeah.
Provided like sort
Sure.
of, zero interest rate loans and things like that. So more than once.
Sometimes it's just okay to do it because it's the right thing
Yeah,
to do. I mean, in other words, it doesn't always have to tie to the profit.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Back here. Let's say who you are.
Hi, I'm Amy McLean from a nonprofit called Soul Shop, and I'm just curious, do you ever do mixing business with your giving? Like, we do culture building and team building and that kind of stuff, and we've heard of some of our friends who've done some big team building days for like big giving gifts. like maybe a $20,000 team building day that you do with your partners that's about, gender diversity or about building your self-management or your self-awareness or bullying prevention or something like that. So do you ever mix those things or find that that's a request with your partners?
I know, go ahead.
I could say we get asked to do that as an NGO all the time. So when we think about the different levers we can pull to build a partnership, right, there's the very obvious, like the cash stuff, giving grants. Then there's the employee engagement piece, of which there's multiple sort of flavors. The cause marketing stuff, and then the product level piece. And so, yeah, for us, that's very much part of the critical mix of services, you could say, that we provide. So absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say we work with Operation Warm. I don't know if you're familiar with their organization, and they do a lot of employee activation days around giving warm coats to kids, and they do monetize them. They do ask for philanthropic donations from various companies that are looking to invest in employee activation opportunities at $10,000, $20,000 an event. So we've seen that be really successful for them. I don't know if you guys have ever participated in it. But.
Yeah. And I can share also, so for McKesson, we have national sales conferences that have about 2,000 attendees, and what we're finding is that, our employee population, whether you're at corporate or at sales or at a call center, are really asking for volunteer engagement opportunities. And so at our sales conference, it's very traditional for us to incorporate a giving volunteer element, and the McKesson Foundation always supports that with a grant.
Okay, another question.
Good.
Right here.
Where's the mic?
Hello.
Oh.
I'm Janine. I'm from ModCloth. A lot of you on the panel are from very large organizations, and in terms of trying to build out the social responsibility component of your organizations, you are very far down your path. And when you're talking about creating an amazing mission-driven program similar to like what you talked about with Timberland and this amazing supply chain and all of that, like where do you see, how do smaller organizations start doing something like that, where you have the idea or you maybe have like the dream of what it could be, but then how do you get from kind of point A to point B? Or could also be anybody else in the room that has a point of view on that as well.
I can share a thought because we advise small firms on this, and I'd share maybe a couple of patterns that we see. One is the importance, as I think we've all talked about, of it being close to or central to the mission in some way, because if it isn't, it feels too far afield to engage, particularly in a smaller organization, enough people, critical mass, to say, presumably they're there because of the mission, for them to say, yes, enroll me in this. We staff teams on the two themes I mentioned on gender diversity and youth unemployment. They're incredibly popular to staff, right? Our people are excited about it. And so I think the connection to the mission is a key thing. The second thing that we see quite commonly on where to start with smaller organizations is to make sure that you start out by building some network of partners so that you get some amplification, if you will, right, of the energy and the capability that you might have, right? And it's not hard, I think, once you declare something or go out and test something, to find that small group of partners outside of your organization to get going.
And if I could add something, what we find is that frequently the conversation is public-private partnership bilateral. We love Save the Children gets along with us, we do something together, good. But the fact of the matter is that most of the problems that we're trying to solve are not going to be solved just bilateral. And so we frequently are looking for partnerships in a broader definition, where we're looking for the startup who has a skill that I don't have. And that supply chain or that capability matrix is something that I'm looking to find somebody that I can work with. Many of my partnerships actually have a dozen or more corporations of everything from small startup in sub-Saharan Africa all the way to a New York Stock Exchange level firm. And so think about what you do well, what's the heart of your business, and who, maybe not just from an NGO standpoint, but who also from a private sector standpoint would be interested in having you as a partner. That can be extraordinarily synergistic.
All right, we have like 10 seconds.
7.
Oh, can we have time for one? It has to be like a lightning, yes or no? Okay, one more question, and we'll get the lightning round response to it.
So you guys have spoken a lot about partnerships. And I don't need the mic. You guys have spoken a lot about partnerships and how essential those are. Could you talk a little bit about what the importance of the actual programs that you guys are offering? I think in some, I know we only had 10 seconds.
That's okay.
I think in some cases, partnerships are great programs. The idea of the program is wonderful. Sometimes the employees can feel like that it's like unfulfilling. You know, like oh yeah, we showed up and we did a little bit of work with this program, but they left and didn't really get anything out of it. So can you speak a little bit more about an example of how employees are getting something fulfilling out of it?
I will do one piece, and I think you might have, Vicki, some others. We don't do a single program. You won't come to Mastercard and talk about our mission statement and our theory of change and everything and have one program. It is every day, you walk the halls, regardless of the office, you're going to be confronted with what have you done to fill our vision. And that may be a one-off program that we're doing with Save the Children, but it may be a long-term micro-mentoring program. And so there are diverse opportunities, but it doesn't stop with a one-time event. That's not sustainable, that's not cultural, that's not who we are. And I find that when you build in the philanthropic, the social responsibility and all of it, it doesn't feel hollow. It becomes who the company is. And I don't know, Vicki, if you would agree with that or not.
Yeah. Yes, and if I can just give one quick example. I mean, you asked, I volunteer here, and is it really making a difference? Well, it's interesting because when we started doing the care package program, employees were like, okay, are these care packages really making a difference? And so we learned from our journey, and what we did was we actually invited with the care packages the patients to receive them. We noted the name of the employee volunteer and invited them to put their comments on McKesson in the Community Facebook page, something super simple. And what we found was that patients were actually saying, thank you so much, Daniel from Redwood City, for creating this care package. This is what it meant to me to enter the Hope Lodge as I was uncertain about my treatment going forward, and your note really made a difference. And when employees started to see that and really hear from patients, we saw that the engagement levels really rose. And so it could be just as simple as like letting your employees hear from the demographic that you're trying to make a difference for.
Great. All right, that was a great final question. Thank you. Let's have a huge round of applause for. Thank you. We could talk about so much more, but anyway, thank you, and great audience with great questions.